He's destroying me with my own strength.
Exploring adaptations can be a fascinating way of examining the strengths and weaknesses of the original source text. What was changed and why? Was it a necessity, something that needed to be changed to convey meaning in the new medium? Do the changes add to the experience or detract from it? And yes, you can still do that for a 6-minute cartoon. We're about to. For we are about to dive into The Pernicious Parasite, an episode of The New Adventures of Superman from the year 1966. The New Adventures of Superman was an animated adventure series produced through Filmation that ran from 1966 to 1970, though the name would shift over the years, and for a couple of years they would have different characters in there as well, but then for the first year it was just Superman all the time. And for the fourth year also. The first year of 1966 to 1967 was The New Adventures of Superman, which consisted of 2 Superman segments and Adventures of Superboy segment, bringing the entire episode up to where it fit into the 30-minute time slot. This series proved quite popular, and it also sought to work closely with DC Comics writers. And then DC editor Mort Weisinger was often listed as a story consultant. The series had a lot of firsts when it came to animated debuts, like the first animated appearance of Jimmy Olsen. And then we had lots of villains too, like Lex Luthor, Brainiac, Toyman, also the Parasite, sort of. The Parasite also debuted in 1966 in Action Comics 340 and was created by Jim Shooter. We did an entire video on his first appearance, and the character's beautiful simplicity, and how that rendered him an excellent foe for the Man of Steel. Now, Weisinger had purchased that script from Shooter and been the editor on that story, and there were some striking changes made from story to screen. Weisinger is listed as a story consultant for this episode. I will of course link the first video down below and there'll be a card. But for those who have no time, a quick Cliff Notes synopsis of what went on. Superman brings back some radioactive substance from space that he's studying, then seals up the waste and wants the lab to dispose of it. They send disgruntled and mistreated worker Maxwell Jensen to do so, who starts to think that maybe it's not waste, maybe it's some kind of scam, they're actually moving something valuable. Maybe it's some kind of score he can steal and get back at them for not being treated well, plus he needs money. So he opens it and is blasted with radiation and becomes the Parasite, now purple and deformed. He quickly realizes he can absorb not just the strength, but the intelligence of others, and so decides he will use his abilities for a life of crime for as long as he can. While he's plotting, he accidentally absorbs some energy from Superman, who flies by his window. And he figures that if he can get Superman's energy, he can be forever charged. So he goes to where the Man of Steel should be building a hospital, but at that moment he's Clark reporting on the story. But the Parasite absorbs from him, drawn to his energy, and so is able to determine that Clark is Superman. He then lures him out by robbing a bank, secure in not just his powers, but his leverage because he knows Clark's identity. And then the two battle for the rest of the issue. Superman slowly being drained of his power, trying his best to think of a way to defeat the Parasite. And by this point, the Parasite has even been shown to have taken some of his special abilities, like heat vision. When suddenly the Parasite panics and explodes, for he absorbed too much energy. He was just a man, a mutated purple man. The end, for now. Until 1968 in the next story. It was a solid story that gave Superman a dangerous threat to go up against, who challenged him on a physical and emotional level. It was also a fun one that would prove to be the birth of one of Superman's most enduring and dangerous foes. So how does the animated adaptation fare? Well, right off the bat, it must be acknowledged that this segment is 6 minutes. So they're gonna have to be concise, and obviously some cuts are gonna be made. So bearing that in mind, let's take a look at the Pernicious Parasite. Pernicious works well, not just as an alliteration, but as a good word to describe the Parasite's abilities. We open on our soon-to-be Parasite, no longer named Maxwell Jensen.
A figure sneaks in the darkness. It is Icy Harris, a specialist in stealing radioactive isotopes.
I scoured trying to ascertain why they chose this name because it sounded slightly punny, or like it was potentially a reference. Was it because James Andrew Harris discovered 104 and 105 on the elements? They went out of their way to change this name. Was it to avoid having to give credit to Shooter and hence pay him? It baffles me. The character also looks different now, rocking a handlebar mustache that makes you think after stealing these isotopes, he's off to tie a damsel to some railroad tracks.
Empty. Bah! Galaxy 4. Never heard of that one.
So in both versions, there's a reason why our Parasite opens the canister. The comic provides us with one a bit more linked to some kind of internal turmoil, bitterness, and pathos, even if it doesn't elaborate. We know there that Jensen needs money and that he's been through multiple jobs very quickly. And also we've seen that the people here are treating him badly and he's not very respected and he's resentful of it. So he's looking for a kind of quick out. And he doesn't mind if it's less than reputable, showing the early signs of criminality already. So when he decides to go full villain after his transformation, it's not that surprising. Here, Icy is already in a life of crime, so again, that's not surprising after he transforms. But his motivation for opening this mysterious tin full of a substance that he can't identify is just because he doesn't want to leave with nothing. But then later we see him leaving with a bunch of money, so there was money there. So he could just have taken that and not risked opening some bizarre compound. Opening random containers doesn't make you sound like an expert, and the narrator said you were one. Of course, after opening it, Icy is now transformed. I'm not sure if you're supposed to hit the IC or if they want you to say it like Icy. The thing with this transformation is that he doesn't physically change. He looks the same, which takes some of the weight and horror out of the moment. But like Jensen, he quickly learns that he can drain people.
Let me go! Well, he's fainted. I've like absorbed some of his strength. Nothing can stop me from becoming a Superman of crime.
I mean, why not? Just up the ante. In this version, he comes into contact with Clark, who's just happening by the area on his way to work to report on a story. He spots the commotion, sees Icy coming out with his bag full of money, and runs in to do something. And he starts getting drained. Icy Harris figures it's so much energy, this must be Superman. A bold leap in logic, which just so happens to be right. Clark pretty much confirms it when he manages to run away into a police van and then comes out the other side as Superman. Oh gee, where did Clark Kent go? So the Parasite decides he will cause disasters that force Superman to come to him and drain him, and he does. He really likes to throw things at other things. Now the two end up battling it out like the comic, and this fight does have its moments. Now the one thing about the comic is that the ending was rather abrupt. It looks like it's all over for Superman, then within the span of 4 panels, Parasite's exploding and Superman's giving a quick, well, he absorbed too much energy, he was greedy. But it comes across like this may not have been Superman's plan, like he probably knew but they're not explicit about it. Here in the Pernicious Parasite episode, we get to see Superman come to that conclusion.
Earthman. Of course, now I know what to do. Must give him what he wants.
He realizes that the Parasite should only be able to absorb so much of his power before it's too much, and then decides that he's gonna give it all to him. Shove it down his throat, metaphorically.
Good boy! Now I've got it all! Now oh no! Let me go! Please! I can't stand it!
It gets kind of intense here with Icy begging for him to stop. Basically begging for his life and turning tail and running, knowing that he is absorbing too much energy and he's about to die. Dark. Superman straight up killed him.
What in the world made him explode? Greed.
I mean, I don't know if that same line can apply here because he was trying to pull back. A bunch of you in the comments when we did the original video brought up this episode, asking if I'd seen it, which I hadn't at the time, so I always appreciate when you tell me about things like this. I really enjoyed watching this, particularly from a comparative perspective. I can see why the original story would be tapped for adaptation. It's a strong outing. It's got plenty of adventure and action for Superman and a dangerous villain. But there are some big changes made here, and so some of what makes the original story stand out is lost. Some of it can be attributed to time, but there are other elements missing too. The lack of physical transformation is a big blow. It makes the character feel generic and even makes the name feel more intellectually abstract. Seeing Jensen physically change, it really hammers home the fact that his life will now be different. It can't be the same. It also adds a monstrous element that many associate with parasitic organisms. In the comic, how Jensen discovers that Clark is Superman is clever. It's obvious, but it also adds a layer of intelligence to the villain because he's figured out something that the other characters in the story have a hard time with. And he's done it in a very logical way. The conclusion that he's drawn, you can follow it. In the Pernicious Parasite, it's just an assumption that Icy makes. And we know that he's right about that because as the viewer/reader, we already know that Clark is Superman. In order to be able to do more with the episode, because this doesn't really factor in because they don't do anything with him wanting to threaten Clark as Clark, then they could have just had him show up as Superman right away and then just dive in. They would have had more time for some Icy and Superman fighting. He could have thrown more stuff. They also don't bother explaining the fact that the Parasite can also absorb intelligence, which may have been a way to explain how we figured out the identity through just assuming. The one thing I'd argue for as an improvement is the drama injected into the ending by having Superman so obviously turn the Parasite's power against him. A moment like that in the comic would have been immensely satisfying, especially after how much of an advantage the Parasite had throughout that fight. And you have Superman's internal thoughts, so you know he's trying to figure it out. And so if you actually saw him come to that conclusion like, haha, finally, in his final moments, that could have been pretty cathartic. A kind of desperate last hurrah. And you could even have added an element of, ooh, maybe, will it work, will it not work, to even up the stakes. But you would have had to make it work around the code to make it seem like Superman wasn't just murdering him, which by keeping it vague in the panels they do. They also don't exactly explicitly explain what happened to him. It's just, oh, he's particles now. That's how that alien could reconstitute him later on, which is also a smart bet because then he can come back. There's a darkness to the episode's ending. Some of the commenters mentioned that it freaked them out, particularly as they had watched it when they were younger. And you know what? I see it. It suddenly starts going very hard, especially if you're 9, like one of the commenters mentioned. I remember being that age and seeing the end of Fern Gully, where Hexus goes full toxic waste Skeletor. It terrified yet fascinated me. I used to watch that movie over and over again just to get to that scene, because my parents told me not to rewind to that part because then you would mess up the tape and there'd be a permanent blip on the VHS from going back to specifically that part, and we were renting it. I thought that was the coolest part and that the design looked so cool and scary. It was definitely not what the movie was going for. That's not what it wanted me to take from it, but it's what I took from it. What's a scene that freaked you out when you were a kid? Share down below. Sharing is caring. And while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, I already said that, but do it some more. Comment again and subscribe. As for this episode, it does miss out by not having the Parasite have his iconic design. It makes him overall less memorable, though there were people who clearly remembered this episode largely because of the ending. It's an interesting adaptation. I would love to hear your theories as to why it was changed. So put that down below too. And thanks so much as always for taking some time out of your day to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.